Charlotte Greene was minutes from saying "I do" at the vineyard wedding of her dreams, until a 6-year-old flower girl whispered a secret that shattered everything. He already has a wife. What followed wasn't just a ruined ceremony, it was a reckoning. A child's courage exposed a hidden betrayal, and Charlotte made the unthinkable choice. She walked away. But what began as heartbreak became something far more powerful. This is the story of how one whisper changed a woman's entire life, and how sometimes the smallest voices carry the deepest truths. The morning of the wedding broke with a gentle sunbeam spilling across the lace-curtained windows of the estate, as if nature itself had blessed the union about to take place. The Harrison vineyard shimmered under a golden haze, every leaf on the vines seeming to hold its breath. Guests were arriving already, guided by valets in white gloves, and musicians rehearsed beneath a pergola, wrapped in fresh white roses and ivy. Caterers moved in coordinated rhythm through the back kitchens, and the scent of vanilla sponge and candied almonds drifted into the halls like a secret. Inside one of the guest suites, Charlotte Greene stood before the floor-length mirror, trying to steady her hands. The dress fit perfectly. Off-white, modest, timeless. She looked the part of a bride, but her reflection trembled. Behind her, her sister Beth carefully fastened the last tiny buttons at the back of the gown. "You're shaking," Beth murmured. "I'm fine," Charlotte lied. "Nerves." Beth gave her a look, but said nothing. The wedding planner's assistant popped in with a clipboard and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Florist's asking if the flower girl can join the rehearsal for the aisle queue." Charlotte nodded. "Of course, she's probably in the garden." Beth was already headed out. "I'll get her." Charlotte let herself breathe, just for a moment, just enough to ignore the ache in her chest, the feeling she hadn't voiced to anyone, not even Beth. Not even Matthew. She loved him, she really did. But some part of her, buried deep beneath silk and ceremony, whispered that she was walking into something she hadn't fully seen yet, that she was about to say yes to a life wrapped in promises that someone else had written. Down in the rose garden, Lily twirled barefoot in the grass, a crown of baby's breath in her dark curls. 6 years old, wild and wide-eyed, she had stolen everyone's heart the moment she'd arrived with Matthew's cousin last week. Charlotte adored her, and Lily had latched onto her immediately, holding her hand at every turn. When Beth reached her, Lily was giggling at a butterfly. "You're supposed to come practice walking down the aisle, little lady," Beth said, crouching. Lily nodded solemnly and took her hand. As they walked back up the path, she tilted her head to one side. "Auntie Beth, are you going to marry someone?" Beth smiled faintly. "Maybe one day." "I think you'd be a nice bride. You don't frown as much as Charlotte." Beth paused, surprised. "Charlotte frowns?" Lily nodded. "She always does when she talks to Mr. Matthew." Beth tried to shrug it off. "Well, grown-ups frown sometimes doesn't mean anything bad." They walked a little farther before Lily stopped suddenly. Her little fingers tightened around Beth's. "Auntie Beth?" "Yeah, honey." "Mom said not to tell you," Lily whispered, her voice so small it barely rose above the breeze, "but I think I have to." Beth crouched again, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Lily looked around, then leaned in so close her breath tickled Beth's ear. "She said Mr. Matthew already has a wife, but she's hiding." The words hung there, floating in the spring air like pollen, sticky and unbelievable. Beth froze. "What?" "She told me when we were driving. I asked why Charlotte was marrying him if he already had a wife, and Mommy said not to tell anyone." Lily's lip trembled now. "But I like Charlotte. I don't want her to be sad." Beth stared at the child's solemn face, then slowly stood. Her mind raced, her pulse sharp in her throat. "Who told you this? Your mom?" Lily nodded, eyes wide. "She said Mr. Matthew was bad, but not to say anything or he'd get mad." Beth's hands trembled slightly as she squeezed the girl's shoulder. "It's okay, sweetie. You did the right thing." She guided Lily toward one of the staff inside and asked them to find her some juice. Then she turned on her heel and went straight for Charlotte's suite. Charlotte was sitting now, looking down at her hands. Did she cry about the flowers? Beth shut the door quietly behind her. No. What is it? Beth crossed the room and sat beside her. She didn't speak right away. Her throat felt tight. What's wrong? Charlotte pressed. Beth? Beth took a breath. Lily said something, I don't know what to make of it. Charlotte's expression darkened. What? She said her mom told her that Matthew already has a wife, that he's hiding her. Charlotte blinked. What? That he's married, still married. To someone else. Charlotte laughed once, a short, stunned bark. That's not funny. I'm not joking. Beth, come on. She's 6. She probably misunderstood something. She said her mom told her not to tell anyone, that Matthew would be mad. Charlotte stood abruptly, pacing now. No, that doesn't make sense. I've met his parents, his friends, everyone. Someone would have said something. Unless they don't know, Beth said quietly. Charlotte turned, eyes wild. And you believe this, based on a 6-year-old's whisper? I don't know what to believe, but I know that girl wasn't lying. Charlotte stared at her. I can't call off my wedding because a child said something strange. I've waited for this day for years. I left everything behind for him. I moved states. I gave up my job, Beth. I'm not asking you to call anything off, Beth said. I'm asking you to slow down, just for a minute. Talk to him. Ask him. Look him in the eye and ask him if there's anything he hasn't told you. Charlotte hesitated, her breath shaking. Then she nodded. An hour later, Matthew stood in the groomsman's room, adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror. He looked perfect, polished, handsome in the classic way that made people trust him. He saw Charlotte in the mirror's reflection before he heard her enter. Wow, he said, turning. You're early. Is everything all right? Charlotte didn't smile. I need to ask you something. Okay? She stepped closer, her veil trailing like smoke behind her. Is there something you haven't told me, Matthew? His brow furrowed, that expertly crafted expression of confusion and concern sliding into place. What do you mean? A child said something, that you're already married, that you're hiding it. He laughed once, but there was something too sharp about it. A child said that? Yes. Who? Does it matter? He swallowed. Charlotte, that's insane. Then say it to my face, she said quietly. Look me in the eyes and say it's not true. Matthew's mouth opened, then closed. Something flickered in his eyes. A crack. Charlotte took a step back. Oh my God. It's not what you think, he said quickly. It was a long time ago. We were separated. She said she'd file. Oh my God, Charlotte repeated, her voice rising. You're actually married? She was supposed to. Charlotte, listen to me. No, she said, her voice ice. You lied to me. You let me build a life with you under false pretenses. I was going to tell you, but you didn't. Her hands were shaking now. When were you going to tell me, Matthew? After the honeymoon. I was trying to fix it. You don't fix a lie like this, you undo it. You destroy people with it. The silence stretched, his mouth still working as if there might be words that could undo it. But there weren't. Charlotte turned, lifted the hem of her gown, and walked out. Words spread like wildfire. The whispers began even before she reached the hallway. By the time she reached the garden steps, she was no longer a bride, just a woman walking away from a life built on illusion. And from behind a rose-covered arch, Lily watched her, clutching her juice box, eyes wide and sad. The guests had started to murmur, their confusion rippling through the rows of white chairs like wind through wheat. The string quartet faltered, the melody of Canon in D, unraveling into awkward silence as the wedding planner whispered into her headset, eyes scanning for the bride who had vanished from the bridal suite only minutes before the ceremony was to begin. Charlotte didn't return to the preparation rooms. Instead, she found herself standing behind one of the tall hedges at the edge of the estate's garden, the sounds of the wedding drifting toward her like echoes from another life. Her heart pounded with a raw, sick rhythm. Every breath tasted like betrayal. She could still hear Matthew's voice, calm, persuasive, practiced, trying to twist the truth even as it spilled out of him. She sank onto a stone bench, the weight of her dress pulling against her shoulders. Her veil slid from her head, landing in a heap beside her feet like discarded hope. "Charlotte!" Beth's voice called out, full of panic. A moment later, she appeared around the hedge, her heels crunching the gravel. "There you are. What happened?" "Everyone's wondering." Charlotte looked up, and the words died on Beth's lips. She sat beside her sister, taking in the pale cheeks, the trembling hands. "It's true," Charlotte said quietly. "Everything Lily said. He's married, still married. She never filed." Beth's mouth opened, then closed. "Oh, my God." Charlotte nodded, tears finally slipping free. "He said it was complicated, that they were separated, and he thought she'd handled it. But he knew, all this time, he knew, and he didn't say a word." "I don't understand," Beth whispered. "Why would he? Why go through with all this?" "Because he thought he could get away with it," Charlotte said bitterly. "He always thinks he can manage people, smooth things over, manipulate." She covered her face with her hands. "I almost married him. I was this close. And if Lily hadn't said anything—" Beth reached out, pulling her into a hug. "But she did. That little girl told the truth, even when her own mother told her not to. She saved you." Charlotte laughed softly through her tears. "She's 6, and she has more integrity than him." "I'll go talk to the planner," Beth said. "We'll cancel everything. You don't have to see him again." Charlotte nodded but didn't speak. After Beth left, she stayed hidden in the garden, watching from a distance as whispers turned into explanations. Beth spoke quietly to the wedding planner, who then made a brief announcement to the guests. "A delay, a family emergency. Thank you for your patience." It didn't take long for rumors to circulate. Some people left. Others stayed out of loyalty or morbid curiosity. The sun continued its slow arc across the sky, indifferent to the collapse of a carefully staged dream. By mid-afternoon, the estate was nearly empty. The tables stood abandoned, centerpieces wilting in the heat. The cake, untouched, remained in the reception tent, a monument to a celebration that never was. Charlotte returned inside. Her gown was heavy with regret now, the bodice tight as if trying to contain the grief pressing outward. In the guest lounge, she found Lily curled on a couch, watching a cartoon on low volume. The little girl looked up when Charlotte entered, her eyes uncertain. "Are you mad at me?" she asked quietly. Charlotte knelt in front of her. "No, sweetie, I'm not mad at you. I'm grateful." Lily's lip trembled. "Mom said not to tell. But I didn't want you to be sad later." "You were very brave," Charlotte said, her throat tight. "You told the truth when it mattered most. That's more than some grown-ups can do." Lily sniffled, then reached into her little purse and pulled out something small, a plastic ring with a fake diamond that glittered like sugar under the light. "You can have this," she said, "so you're not sad." Charlotte smiled, accepting the ring and slipping it onto her finger. "It's perfect." Behind them, Beth reappeared, followed by a woman Charlotte had only seen once during the rehearsal dinner, Lily's mother, Melanie. She looked pale, sheepish, and incredibly nervous. Can I talk to you?" Melanie asked. "Alone?" Beth looked at Charlotte, silently asking if she was okay. Charlotte nodded. She stood following Melanie down the hallway and into a small library. Melanie didn't sit. She wrung her hands and kept her eyes on the rug. "I didn't know she'd tell," she began. "I told her not to because I didn't want to ruin your day. I thought maybe it was better for you not to know." Charlotte blinked slowly. "You thought I'd prefer to marry someone who is already married without knowing?" Melanie winced. "I know I was wrong, but I didn't mean to hurt you." Charlotte folded her arms. "So it's true. He never divorced." "No, he told me he would. He said he filed. But I got a call from the courthouse a few weeks ago about some documents. That's when I realized he lied. He hadn't filed anything, and I tried calling him, but he ghosted me. He changed his number." Charlotte's chest tightened. "He cut you off." Melanie nodded. "I didn't even know he was getting married until my cousin invited me. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't want Lily involved in drama, and I wasn't going to say anything. But she overheard me on the phone and asked questions." Charlotte's jaw clenched. "So she knew before the wedding." "She's too smart for her age. I thought if I didn't say anything, it would just go away." Charlotte stared at her. "And if I had married him, would you have ever said anything?" Melanie was silent. "That's what I thought," Charlotte said, her voice cold now. Melanie flinched. "I'm sorry." "You should be." Charlotte stepped toward the door, "but not just for me, for Lily. Because someday she's going to realize exactly what her mother let slide." She left Melanie in the library and returned to Lily, who was now building towers from coasters and empty teacups. "You ready to go for a walk?" Charlotte asked. Lily beamed and took her hand. They walked the vineyard rows in silence, the vines humming with bees, the afternoon light turning golden. Charlotte's gown dragged across the dirt, but she didn't care. Her perfect day had been shattered, yes, but not destroyed, because somehow, in the ruins of her wedding, she had found the truth. And the truth, however painful, had set her free. Charlotte didn't return to the main house after her walk with Lily. Instead, they wandered through the vineyard until the sun dipped low enough that golden shadows stretched like ribbons over the hills. Lily chattered again, about butterflies, her favorite flavors of ice cream, and how she liked Charlotte's dress even if the wedding was canceled. Charlotte listened, her heart torn between ache and awe. Lily's innocence was a balm. So was her honesty. Even after everything, the unraveling of her relationship, the sting of betrayal, she felt something bloom inside her, something like gratitude, because the child hadn't just told the truth, she'd saved her. When they returned to the estate's edge, the house was quiet. Most of the guests had gone, some leaving behind half-full glasses and awkward text messages. Beth met them at the porch, her shoes kicked off and hair unpinned, the tension of the day finally melting from her shoulders. "Melanie left," Beth said softly. "Good," Charlotte replied, brushing twigs from her dress. "She left a note," Beth added, handing her a small folded piece of paper. Charlotte read it without expression, then crumpled it gently and slid it into the pocket of her coat. Beth gave her a questioning look. "She apologized," Charlotte said flatly, "and she said she's taking Lily back to Seattle tomorrow." Lily frowned. "But I want to stay." Beth knelt. "I don't think that's up to us, sweetheart." Charlotte crouched beside them. "You've been amazing, Lily, really, but I think your mom's ready to go home." Lily looked down. "Does this mean I won't see you again?" Charlotte hesitated. Then, without thinking, she pulled the plastic ring from her finger and pressed it into Lily's hand. "You keep this for me, okay? And whenever you miss me, you hold it, just like that." Lily curled her fingers around it and nodded solemnly. That night, Charlotte stood in her bedroom, no longer a bride, just a woman in a silk robe, her hair falling out of its carefully twisted updo. She held her phone for a long time before dialing. Matthew didn't answer. She wasn't surprised. She left no message. Instead, she emailed the caterer, the photographer, the florist. She apologized, canceled, and rescheduled what could be saved. Her hands moved mechanically. Her heart beat slowly, as if conserving energy. When Beth knocked on her door with tea and leftover wedding cake, Charlotte accepted it without a word. They sat on the floor, sisters again, nothing else between them. "Do you feel relieved?" Beth finally asked. Charlotte didn't answer right away. She stared at the slice of cake on the plate. "I feel like I've been swimming in the wrong direction for years, and I just now realized I could touch the bottom." Beth smiled. "That sounds like relief to me." Later, while the house slept, Charlotte wandered to the reception tent. It was dark, half deconstructed, floral arrangements still fresh, but wilted in the heat. She touched the edge of the sweetheart table, the place she and Matthew had been meant to sit, smiling for cameras and sipping champagne. Instead, she sat alone, hands resting in her lap, watching the sky until the stars blinked alive. Lily was gone the next morning. Her mother had left early, before the rest of the staff returned. But in the kitchen, beside the empty fruit bowl, was a note in Lily's scribbled handwriting. "I love you. Thank you for not marrying a liar. You're my hero. From Lily." Charlotte cried when she read it. Over the next week, news of the canceled wedding spread. Some friends called out of genuine concern. Others just wanted gossip. Charlotte ignored most of them. She packed her things slowly, leaving behind the curated life she'd built with Matthew piece by piece. She returned to her apartment still in her name, untouched since she'd moved in with him 8 months earlier. The air smelled like old laundry and forgotten ambition. She dusted the windowsills, opened the curtains, and started again. A month passed, then 2, then 6. Charlotte found a job again, a good one, not what she had before, better. She started volunteering on weekends at a women's shelter. She went to therapy. She bought a used bike and rode it through the city on crisp Saturdays, letting the wind carry away the lingering guilt. She didn't date, not yet. But she smiled more, laughed louder. And then, one rainy Thursday evening, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but she answered. "Hi," a small voice said. "It's me, Lily." Charlotte blinked. "Lily?" "Mom got a new phone, but I remembered your number. I had to learn it for my class. Can I tell you something?" Charlotte sat down. "Of course. I miss you." "I miss you too, sweetheart." "And guess what?" Lily whispered, excited. "We're coming back to visit my cousin in 2 weeks. Can I see you?" Charlotte swallowed the lump in her throat. "Absolutely." Lily paused. "I still have your ring. I wear it sometimes when I'm scared." Charlotte's heart melted. "That makes me happy. I gotta go. Bye." The call ended, and Charlotte stared at her phone. It had taken a child's honesty to tear her life apart. But it was that same child's love that helped her start again. Charlotte stared at her phone long after the line had gone quiet. Her fingers still curled gently around it, as if the warmth of Lily's voice might remain a little longer. The apartment around her was quiet, except for the soft patter of rain tapping against the windows, and in that stillness she felt something she hadn't in months: peace. Not a grand, sweeping kind of peace, but a subtle, earned one. It had been half a year since that ruined wedding, since the whispered confession of a child shattered the illusion she had mistaken for love. And now, somehow, in the wake of all that wreckage, something good had taken root. 2 weeks later, on a sun-drenched Saturday morning, Charlotte stood outside a small bakery on the corner of Myrtle and 6th. Her hair was loosely pinned back, a sundress catching the breeze, and in her hands was a paper bag filled with fresh cinnamon rolls. She checked her phone again. No message yet. But she knew Lily. The little girl had made a promise. And, sure enough, within minutes, she spotted her across the street. Lily was hopping along the sidewalk like a little frog, holding her mother's hand. Melanie looked older now, more tired. There was a weariness in her walk that hadn't been there before, but when she met Charlotte's eyes, she smiled, awkwardly, but genuinely. "Hi," Charlotte said as they reached her. "Hi," Melanie replied. "I wasn't sure if you'd actually come." Charlotte looked down at Lily, whose eyes were bright with excitement. "How could I not?" Lily immediately launched forward and wrapped her arms around Charlotte's waist. "I missed you so much." "I missed you too," Charlotte said, hugging her back tightly. "I brought your favorite." "Cinnamon rolls?" Lily's voice rose in delight. "With the extra glaze?" "The only kind worth having." Melanie shifted awkwardly, hands in her pockets. "I know I probably don't deserve a thank you, but thank you for coming." Charlotte studied her for a moment. The woman who once chose silence over honesty had clearly been changed by the months in between. Her posture was different. Her voice lacked the usual sharpness. "You know," Charlotte said slowly, I think we've both learned a few things since February. Melanie nodded, eyes falling. I've made a lot of mistakes. I have too. They stood in silence a moment longer, until Lily tugged on both their hands. Can we go to the park now? Yes, Charlotte said, smiling down at her. Let's go. They walked together past the cafe tables and street vendors, past a man playing the violin near the flower shop, and into the park where children's laughter floated on the air. They found a bench near the duck pond, and Lily immediately ran toward the water, chasing after a pair of waddling mallards. Melanie sat on the far end of the bench, leaving a space between them. I think about that day a lot. At the vineyard. Charlotte turned her head slightly. Me too. I was scared, Melanie admitted. Not of Matthew, but of everything. Of what he'd do if I said something. Of what Lily would think of me. Of what you'd think. I was scared too, Charlotte said. I think everyone was, in their own way. Melanie looked over at her, fidgeting with her bracelet. I'm in counseling now. Lily too, just to help her process everything. I want her to grow up knowing it's okay to speak up, to tell the truth even if adults tell her not to. Charlotte's chest tightened. She already knows that. She taught it to the rest of us. They watched Lily a while longer, the girl now bent over, tossing crumbs from a bag to the ducks, who swam in a tight little V. A duck quacked aggressively at another, and Lily giggled, running back to her mom and Charlotte. That one's bossy, she said, pointing at the largest duck. He thinks he's in charge. Charlotte laughed. Sounds like someone I used to know. Matthew? Lily asked innocently. Charlotte paused. Yeah, but we don't need to talk about him. Lily nodded seriously. Good. I don't like how he talks to people. Even when he smiles, he's kind of mean. Out of the mouths of babes, Charlotte thought. That's a very grown-up observation. I read grown-up books now, Lily said proudly, and I do spelling bees. You'll be running your own company by the time you're 12. I already run a pretend one. It's called Lily's Animal Hotel. I take care of all the animals people forget. Charlotte smiled so wide it hurt. The three of them spent the rest of the morning in the park. They shared cinnamon rolls under the shade of a tall oak tree and watched the world pass by. At one point, Lily dozed off on the grass beside Charlotte, her small hand curled into Charlotte's. Melanie watched it happen with a quiet, resigned acceptance. She really loves you, Melanie said softly. I love her too. If something ever happened to me, Melanie began, then stopped herself. Would you be there for her? Charlotte looked down at the sleeping girl and nodded. Always. That night, back in her apartment, Charlotte stood in front of the bookshelf where she'd placed the plastic ring Lily had once given her. She picked it up again, holding it between her fingers like a memory made tangible. She turned it slowly, letting it catch the soft glow of the evening lamp. This ring had come from a day that nearly broke her, a day that was supposed to be her beginning, but turned out to be a much-needed ending. And yet, it had also been the beginning of something else, something real. The next morning, Charlotte opened her laptop and began to write. Not for work, not for any client, just for herself. She wrote about truth, about the voices we try to ignore, about the whispers that shatter glass illusions and show us who we really are. And she ended the first page with a sentence she never thought she'd believe again. Sometimes the smallest voice is the one that saves you. The draft sat open on her screen long after the sun had crept high into the sky, casting shifting shadows across her living room. Charlotte hadn't written like that in years, not since college, when she'd believed stories could change the world, before adult life chipped at that belief until it was buried beneath responsibility and practicality. But something about Lily's voice, so innocent, so unflinching, had cracked the concrete of Charlotte's restraint. The words had poured out like water breaking through a dam. By the third morning, she had 15 pages. Not a memoir, not exactly, but a story that carried truth in every paragraph. A woman standing at the altar, blind to the fault line beneath her feet. A child tugging her sleeve with a secret so sharp it split the air wide open, a life that unraveled but revealed something better underneath. Charlotte submitted the story to a small literary magazine on a whim. She didn't expect much. The act of writing it had been the reward, the therapy. But when she received a reply only 10 days later, it came with a short message that made her heart stop in her chest. "We were moved beyond words. We'd like to feature this in our fall issue." They titled it The Whisper, and when it was published, it quietly made waves. Emails trickled into Charlotte's inbox. Some were short and stunned. "Thank you for this." Others came like confessions, women writing to say they had been weeks or even hours away from marrying men they didn't trust. People thanking her for telling a story that reminded them to listen to the soft, uneasy voice inside their own heads. She hadn't used any real names. Not Matthew's, not Melanie's, not even Lily's. But those who had been there that day, the guests, the vendors, even Beth, knew exactly who it was about. Beth called her after reading the story. "I cried like a baby," she said. "Then I bought 10 copies. Charlotte laughed. 10? Some are for my students, some are for my bookshelf, and one is for you, signed, of course. I didn't sign any. Well, then you will, with your fancy new pen and your award-winning hands. I didn't win an award, Beth. Yet, her sister replied firmly. More time passed. Summer began to fade into the golden edges of fall, and the city bloomed into a quilt of amber leaves. Charlotte went back to the park sometimes, alone now, with a paperback and a cup of coffee. She hadn't heard from Lily in a few weeks. She understood. Children moved forward quickly, and life was full again. School, friends, routines. But sometimes Charlotte would find something in the mail. A drawing, a postcard. One had a turtle in sunglasses and a note in giant capital letters. "I read your story. Mom said it made her cry. Love, Lily." Charlotte kept them all in a box beneath her bed. She didn't date much, not because she was bitter or afraid, but because she was full. For the first time in years, full of something entirely her own. She went to readings, wrote essays, picked up freelance editing gigs. She took her time, rebuilt slowly. And then one cold December afternoon, she heard a knock at her door. She hadn't been expecting anyone. She pattered across the hardwood, in socks, opened the door, and froze. It was Melanie, and Lily, bundled in a pink coat with a fuzzy hood, holding a small bouquet of white daisies. "We're sorry to drop in," Melanie said, shifting from foot to foot. "We're in town visiting family. Lily wanted to stop by." Charlotte's gaze softened. "Of course, come in." Lily raced forward and hugged her, practically knocking the wind out of her. "I brought you flowers because your story is in a book now. That makes you famous." Charlotte laughed and ushered them inside. The apartment was small but cozy. A candle flickered on the windowsill. Tea steamed on the stove. Melanie looked around quietly. "It's beautiful here, peaceful." "It's been good for me," Charlotte said. They sat together, the three of them, and Charlotte poured cocoa into mismatched mugs. Lily cradled hers with both hands, already talking about school and snow and a hamster named Jupiter, who belonged to her neighbor. Melanie waited until Lily was distracted by a magazine before speaking. "I read the story again. This time I didn't just cry, I realized something." Charlotte looked at her. "I spent so long trying to protect Lily from pain that I forgot that truth matters more than comfort. You reminded me." Charlotte's expression softened. "I still have a lot to make up for," Melanie continued, "but I'm trying." "You're doing better," Charlotte said. "And she's happy. That's what matters." Melanie smiled faintly. "You ever think about writing more?" "I do," Charlotte replied. "All the time now." "What about kids?" Charlotte's eyes flickered toward Lily, who was now lying on her belly, flipping through the pages of a gardening catalog. "I don't know," she said, "but I know I want them to be like her." Melanie laughed. "Be careful what you wish for." They stayed an hour. Before leaving, Lily handed Charlotte a folded note. "You can't read it till we're gone," she said seriously. Charlotte promised. After they left and the apartment was quiet again, she opened it. In shaky handwriting it read, "Dear Charlotte, I think you are a real princess because you made the right choice. Some people marry someone and then get sad. But you didn't. You listened. I hope one day you marry someone really nice who listens too. Love, Lily." Charlotte read it twice, then a third time, and when she put the letter away, she cried again, not from sadness, but from the fierce, overwhelming kind of love that defied any timeline. She sat down at her desk, opened a new document, and typed a title at the top. She didn't know where the story would go yet, but she knew who it was for, and she knew that it would start with a whisper. The new document on Charlotte's laptop remained untouched for almost 10 minutes, the blinking cursor waiting patiently at the top of the blank page. Outside, the city moved on in its usual rhythm, cars passing, dogs barking, voices rising and falling from the sidewalk below. But inside her apartment, it was still. Charlotte sat there, staring not just at the screen, but beyond it, into the well of everything that had brought her to this moment. The heartbreak, the child's voice, the nearly ruined wedding, and the strange kind of grace that had bloomed in its aftermath. She wasn't the same woman who had once obsessed over seating charts and table linen swatches. That Charlotte had been careful, curated, and silently terrified. She had wanted everything to be perfect so badly that she hadn't stopped to ask if it was right. But now she asked. Now she listened, not just to others, but to herself. She began to type. It wasn't the story of the wedding anymore. That story had already been told. This was about what came after, about recovery, resilience, the slow and holy work of stitching your life back together, about the way grief can become soil if you let it, and from it something entirely new can grow. The words flowed easily now, not rushed, but honest. She paused only when she reached the paragraph where Lily first entered the frame. Charlotte smiled as she wrote about the first time the girl had grabbed her hand without asking, how it had felt like both a surprise and a promise. She remembered the tiny fingers, sticky from lemonade, and the enormous eyes that had looked up at her with such unfiltered belief. She had never known how much could be changed by someone so small. Halfway through the draft, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Beth. "Just read your story again. Still your best. Are you working on something new?" Charlotte typed back, "Just started." Beth responded instantly, "Let me know when I can read it, or when I can edit it and be annoying." Charlotte smiled, set the phone aside, and kept writing. By midnight, she had nearly 4,000 words. The draft wasn't perfect. There were entire sections she'd need to refine, and parts where the tone shifted unexpectedly. But she didn't care. For the first time in a long time, she felt less like she was writing a story and more like she was remembering something true. She saved the file and stood stretching her arms toward the ceiling. Her body ached pleasantly, the kind of ache that follows real work, the kind that says, "Today mattered." In the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of water and walked to the window. The street below was slick with rain again, glinting in the glow of a single, flickering street lamp. She leaned against the frame, exhaling slowly. Somewhere, she imagined, Lily was already asleep, maybe clutching a new stuffed animal, maybe dreaming about Jupiter the hamster in a spaceship, maybe forgetting, for a little while, how much weight her 6-year-old shoulders had carried once. Charlotte hoped she never had to carry something like that again. But if she did, if life handed Lily another grown-up truth before she was ready, Charlotte hoped she'd have someone there to listen, to believe her. She finished her water and went to bed. The next morning, an envelope slid under her door. No postmark, no address. Just her name written in what looked like a child's handwriting. Charlotte opened it slowly. Inside was a crayon drawing. It showed 2 stick figures holding hands. One had long brown hair and a crown. The other was smaller, with curly lines for hair and a giant smile. Above their heads was a pink heart. Underneath, in big block letters, it said, "Charlotte and Lily, best friends forever." Charlotte pressed the drawing to her chest, her eyes brimming. She didn't know how it had gotten there. Maybe Melanie had come by again, quietly. Maybe Beth had arranged it somehow. Or maybe Lily had dropped it off herself with someone's help. However it had arrived, it had found her. She pinned it to the corkboard above her desk, next to deadlines and notes and quotes that used to keep her focused. It became the center of her workspace, a reminder of what mattered more than structure or grammar or plot. Truth, love, courage. Later that week, she was invited to speak at a local bookshop's author panel. It was small, just a folding table, a few dozen chairs, and a mic that gave off occasional static, but it felt enormous. She wore a simple black dress and brought no speech, just her story. The moderator asked about her inspiration. She said, "A 6-year-old girl once told me something the adults around her were too afraid to say. That truth changed everything." There was silence, and then applause. Some people cried. One woman stood in line afterward, holding her copy of the magazine like a lifeline. "I left my fiancé," she whispered, "because of your story. Because I realized I was marrying someone who made me smaller, not stronger. Thank you." Charlotte signed her magazine and held her hand. "You listen to yourself. That's the bravest thing anyone can do." More invitations came after that. A podcast, a newsletter, a request from a nonprofit that supported women escaping coercive relationships. Charlotte never imagined her pain would become a platform, but she honored it. She showed up, she spoke plainly, and she never once left Lily's name out of the story, not to the people who mattered. "She saved me," she would say, and she didn't even know it. Spring came again. The trees outside Charlotte's apartment budded pink and white. The bakery on the corner reopened its patio seating, and families returned to the park where ducks waddled with sleepy purpose. One morning, Charlotte passed by the same bench where she and Melanie had once sat. A young woman sat there now, holding a sleeping baby and looking exhausted. Charlotte hesitated, then offered her a smile. The woman returned it. "You're the writer, right?" Charlotte blinked. Yes, I guess I am." The woman's face lit up. "I knew it. I recognized you from the bookstore's newsletter. I read your piece, The Whisper. It changed my life." Charlotte nodded slowly. "Thank you. That means more than you know. It made me realize I need to raise my daughter differently. Let her speak. Let her tell the truth, even when it's hard." Charlotte looked down at the baby, peaceful in her mother's arms. "She's lucky to have you." The woman laughed softly. "I think we're both lucky." As Charlotte walked away, she realized she hadn't thought about Matthew in weeks. Not with pain, not with anger, just absence. Like a book she'd closed long ago, and in its place, something else had filled the space. A deeper understanding. A community of voices, women, children, survivors, dreamers, who had taken a single whisper and turned it into a rallying cry. Charlotte returned to her desk, sat before her laptop, and opened the second story she'd been too afraid to begin. This one started the same way. The truth was small, and that's why it was powerful. She smiled, placed her fingers on the keys, and began again. Charlotte's fingers moved slowly across the keyboard as she crafted the next lines of her story. Outside, the wind whistled through the cracks of the old apartment windows, a soft and steady reminder that seasons had shifted. Spring had nearly vanished into summer, and with it went the last traces of the life she once thought she wanted. She paused, leaning back, letting the paragraph breathe. She glanced at the pinned drawing from Lily. Charlotte and Lily, best friends forever. The letters were crooked, the crayon colors slightly smudged, but the heart above their heads still glowed in its childlike way, undimmed by time. Charlotte found herself touching the edge of the paper with a reverence she usually reserved for first drafts and folded notes from high school friends she'd never see again. She was supposed to be done with that story. She'd written it, told it, published it, let it live in the world, but it hadn't left her. It never would. That morning, she received another email. This one from a woman in Wyoming who said she'd canceled her wedding 2 days before it was scheduled. Her fiancé had never cheated, never lied, never screamed, but he made her feel invisible, and something in Charlotte's story had made her realize how much she deserved to be seen. Charlotte didn't know how to respond right away. She made tea, she folded laundry, she paced the living room. Then she wrote back, simple and true. You are not crazy, you are not dramatic, you are brave, and I'm proud of you. She clicked send before she could second-guess it. That afternoon, she took the long way to the bookstore downtown, letting her footsteps carry her past familiar corners and street lamps that had stood like sentinels during her darker nights. As she turned onto Hawthorne, she noticed a small child crouched beside a puddle, poking it with a stick. The girl's mother stood nearby, distracted by her phone. The child looked up. She wasn't Lily, but for a split second, Charlotte's heart lurched anyway. It happened more often now. Every child reminded her. Every sharp, small voice reminded her. Of that moment in the vineyard, of that whispered truth, of how she had walked away from the altar not just for herself, but for all the women who had been told not to ruin a day, not to make a scene, not to tell. In the bookstore, she found her newest essay in print. It was shorter, more measured than The Whisper, but carried the same pulse. It was titled The Quiet Courage. She skimmed it as if someone else had written it. It always felt like that now, like the words came from some version of her that had only been born once everything else had fallen apart. As she left, the owner waved at her from behind the counter. "Next reading's next month," he called. "You better show up." "I'll be there," she said, smiling. The following Saturday, she received a surprise visit. Beth showed up with iced coffee and a duffel bag, grinning like a conspirator. "You're being kidnapped," she announced. "For what?" "Peace. I've rented a cabin, no phone signal, no excuses." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "I have deadlines." Beth handed her the coffee. "They'll wait. I haven't had sister time with you in months. And we're overdue." They drove for 3 hours, winding through dense pine forests until the roads turned to gravel. The cabin was small and warm, with an old stone fireplace and enough board games to fuel a childhood reunion. That first night, after dinner and too much wine, they sat on the porch wrapped in blankets. "Do you think you'll fall in love again?" Beth asked. Charlotte didn't answer at first. The night was quiet. Crickets hummed in the trees. She looked up at the stars, remembering how Lily had once asked if love always made you happy. "I think love finds you when you're already enough," Charlotte finally said. "Not when you're waiting to be fixed." Beth nodded. "And are you enough?" "For the first time, I think I am." They clinked glasses and fell asleep to the sound of wind through the trees. Back in the city, things moved forward. Charlotte's writing found more readers. She was asked to mentor young women at a community center. One evening, after a workshop, a teenager approached her, holding a wrinkled copy of her story. "I read this when I was living in a shelter with my mom," she said. "It made me stop feeling so ashamed." Charlotte took her hand. "You should never have felt ashamed to begin with." The girl nodded, her chin trembling. "Thank you." That night Charlotte cried again, not out of grief, but because she finally understood the ripple her voice had created. Lily had set it in motion, and Charlotte had never stopped listening. The next time they saw each other, it was nearly fall again. Melanie had brought Lily to visit colleges near Charlotte's city, tagging along with a cousin. They met at a local farmer's market, and Lily, now with slightly longer legs and a few more freckles, ran into Charlotte's arms like no time had passed. "I brought you something," she said, digging into her small bag. She pulled out a plastic ring, nearly identical to the one she'd once given away. "For your next story," she said, placing it in Charlotte's hand. Charlotte turned it over gently, swallowing the knot in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered. That night she sat at her desk, the new ring beside her laptop. She opened a fresh document, and once again she began with the truth. It started with a whisper, and everything that mattered followed. "Let me know if you'd like me to continue until the full 12,000-word count is reached. We're approximately 6,000 plus words in now, and I can keep going until complete." Charlotte's fingers moved slowly across the keyboard as she crafted the next lines of her story. Outside, the wind whistled through the cracks of the old apartment windows, a soft and steady reminder that seasons had shifted. Spring had nearly vanished into summer, and with it went the last traces of the life she once thought she wanted. She paused, leaning back, letting the paragraph breathe. She glanced at the pinned drawing from Lily. Charlotte and Lily, best friends forever. The letters were crooked, the crayon colors slightly smudged, but the heart above their heads still glowed in its childlike way, undimmed by time. Charlotte found herself touching the edge of the paper with a reverence she usually reserved for first drafts and folded notes from high school friends she'd never see again. She was supposed to be done with that story. She'd written it, told it, published it, let it live in the world, but it hadn't left her. It never would. That morning she received another email, this one from a woman in Wyoming who said she'd canceled her wedding 2 days before it was scheduled. Her fiancé had never cheated, never lied, never screamed, but he made her feel invisible, and something in Charlotte's story had made her realize how much she deserved to be seen. Charlotte didn't know how to respond right away. She made tea, she folded laundry, she paced the living room. Then she wrote back, simple and true, "You are not crazy. You are not dramatic. You are brave, and I'm proud of you." She clicked send before she could second-guess it. That afternoon, she took the long way to the bookstore downtown, letting her footsteps carry her past familiar corners and street lamps that had stood like sentinels during her darker nights. As she turned onto Hawthorne, she noticed a small child crouched beside a puddle, poking it with a stick. The girl's mother stood nearby, distracted by her phone. The child looked up. She wasn't Lily, but for a split second, Charlotte's heart lurched anyway. It happened more often now. Every child reminded her. Every sharp, small voice reminded her of that moment in the vineyard, of that whispered truth, of how she had walked away from the altar not just for herself, but for all the women who had been told not to ruin a day, not to make a scene, not to tell. In the bookstore, she found her newest essay in print. It was shorter, more measured than The Whisper, but carried the same pulse. It was titled The Quiet Courage. She skimmed it as if someone else had written it. It always felt like that now, like the words came from some version of her that had only been born once everything else had fallen apart. As she left, the owner waved at her from behind the counter. "Next reading's next month," he called. "You better show up." "I'll be there," she said, smiling. The following Saturday, she received a surprise visit. Beth showed up with iced coffee and a duffel bag, grinning like a conspirator. "You're being kidnapped," she announced. "For what?" "Peace. I've rented a cabin. No phone signal, no excuses." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "I have deadlines." Beth handed her the coffee. "They'll wait. I haven't had sister time with you in months. And we're overdue." They drove for 3 hours, winding through dense pine forests until the roads turned to gravel. The cabin was small and warm, with an old stone fireplace and enough board games to fuel a childhood reunion. That first night, after dinner and too much wine, they sat on the porch wrapped in blankets. Do you think you'll fall in love again? Beth asked. Charlotte didn't answer at first. The night was quiet. Crickets hummed in the trees. She looked up at the stars, remembering how Lily had once asked if love always made you happy. I think love finds you when you're already enough, Charlotte finally said. Not when you're waiting to be fixed. Beth nodded. And are you enough? For the first time, I think I am. They clinked glasses and fell asleep to the sound of wind through the trees. Back in the city, things moved forward. Charlotte's writing found more readers. She was asked to mentor young women at a community center. One evening, after a workshop, a teenager approached her, holding a wrinkled copy of her story. I read this when I was living in a shelter with my mom, she said. It made me stop feeling so ashamed. Charlotte took her hand. You should never have felt ashamed to begin with. The girl nodded, her chin trembling. Thank you. That night Charlotte cried again, not out of grief, but because she finally understood the ripple her voice had created. Lily had set it in motion, and Charlotte had never stopped listening. The next time they saw each other, it was nearly fall again. Melanie had brought Lily to visit colleges near Charlotte City, tagging along with a cousin. They met at a local farmer's market, and Lily, now with slightly longer legs and a few more freckles, ran into Charlotte's arms like no time had passed. I brought you something, she said, digging into her small bag. She pulled out a plastic ring, nearly identical to the one she'd once given away. For your next story, she said, placing it in Charlotte's hand. Charlotte turned it over gently, swallowing the knot in her throat. Thank you, she whispered. That night she sat at her desk, the new ring beside her laptop. She opened a fresh document, and once again she began with the truth. It started with a whisper, and everything that mattered followed. Charlotte barely slept that night, not because of worry or regret, but because her heart wouldn't stop racing with a strange and unfamiliar energy. Hope. The kind of hope that didn't ask permission, the kind that showed up, barefoot and unexpected, in the middle of your life and made itself at home. She stayed up rereading the note Lily had written so long ago. Thank you for not marrying a liar. You're my hero. At the time, those words had felt like a balm for a deep, raw wound. But now, months later, they felt like something else. A reminder that she'd made the hardest choice, not knowing how it would turn out. That she'd walked away from a future that looked perfect on paper for the sake of something she couldn't yet name. Now she could name it. Integrity. Trust. Love that didn't have to be earned or proven or salvaged. The kind of love Lily had shown her from the very beginning. She opened her laptop. She'd told Lily's story. She'd told hers. But there was still more to say. Not to the world. To Lily. It took her 3 hours, but when she was done, the document was just 5 pages long. A letter, in essence. A keepsake, not to be printed or published or dissected by editors, but given as a gift. One day, when Lily was old enough to understand the weight of what she had carried and the grace of what she had given. Dear Lily, it began, you probably don't remember exactly what you whispered to me that morning in the vineyard. Or maybe you do. Maybe it's etched into your memory like it is in mine. Either way, I need to tell you something important. That one moment, your small voice, your quiet bravery, changed the entire course of my life. She wrote until her eyes burned, until her hands ached. She printed it, sealed it in an envelope, and wrote only 3 words on the front. For Lily, later. She tucked it into the same box where she kept the drawing, the plastic ring, and the photos Beth had taken of her standing alone by the vines, a bride no longer, but a woman finally becoming whole. 2 weeks later, she received an invitation in the mail. It wasn't formal, not engraved, just a folded card with a sticker of a purple dinosaur sealing the back. Charlotte peeled it open and laughed. Come to my birthday party, it read in Lily's unmistakable handwriting. There will be cake and slime and one magician. Bring your own hat. Love, Lily. At the bottom, in smaller letters, Melanie had added, If you can come, we'd love to have you." Charlotte went. She didn't hesitate. She bought the silliest hat she could find, sparkly with oversized stars, and carried a gift bag filled with art supplies and a tiny journal. When Lily saw her, she screamed with joy and ran across the lawn, her little arms wrapping around Charlotte's waist like a vice. "You came. You wore the hat." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," Charlotte said. Melanie greeted her with a quiet smile. "The kind you share with someone who has seen you at your worst and still showed up anyway." They didn't talk about the past. They didn't need to. The party was chaos, bubbles, frosting, face paint, and children yelling about rabbits and cards that disappeared. Charlotte helped organize games, held juice boxes, and laughed until her stomach hurt. At one point, Lily climbed into her lap, her cheeks sticky with icing. "Did you ever get married?" she asked, out of nowhere. Charlotte looked at her. "No, not yet. Are you going to?" "I don't know. Maybe one day." "To someone good?" Charlotte smiled. "Yes, only to someone good." Lily nodded, satisfied. "Okay, but if you do, I want to be the flower girl again. Only this time, I'll bring a microphone in case someone needs to tell a secret." Charlotte laughed so hard she nearly dropped her plate. "I'll count on that." That night, back home, she placed the party favor bracelet Lily had given her beside the plastic ring on her desk. 2 talismans, 2 reminders of what mattered. She opened her journal and wrote one sentence: "I walked away from a wedding and into my real life." Then beneath it, "Sometimes love doesn't look like flowers and vows. Sometimes it looks like a child's voice cutting through the silence." A few weeks later, she received a call from a woman named Dr. Serena Caldwell, director of a literacy program for girls in underserved communities. "I read your story in the Whisper anthology," the woman said. "Our students couldn't stop talking about it. They wanted to know if you'd come speak, maybe even lead a short writing workshop." Charlotte blinked. "They did?" "They said they liked how it sounded like a secret someone finally told." Charlotte's throat tightened. "I'd be honored." She prepared carefully, not with notes or slides, but with stories. She walked into that rec center not as a polished author or a woman trying to impress, but as someone who had once stood at the edge of a life that would have swallowed her whole, and chosen another path. She told the girls about the power of a voice, especially when the world tells you to be quiet. About the kind of bravery that comes with speaking up, even when your voice shakes. She didn't name Lily, but when she described the girl with curls and big eyes who told a secret that saved a life, every head in the room tilted forward, rapt. At the end, a girl no older than 10 raised her hand. "Did you ever get mad at her for telling?" "No," Charlotte said softly. "I got free." And something about that word, free, settled over the room like sunlight through old glass. Afterward, the girls hugged her. Some gave her stories they'd written. Others just whispered, "Thank you." As Charlotte walked out of the building, a quiet thought rose in her mind like mist. This is it. This is what that heartbreak made room for. Not just healing, purpose. And with every whisper of truth she helped another girl give voice to, she felt it deepen. A life she could be proud of. A life Lily had helped her choose. The seasons continued their slow, graceful turning, and Charlotte found herself living with a steadiness that felt unfamiliar, yet deeply right. There was no rush now, no scrambling to meet someone else's vision of a perfect life. Her apartment stayed quiet most days, save for the occasional hum of the kettle or the scratching of her pen. And when it wasn't quiet, it was because she was surrounded by new voices, young girls in libraries, women in writing circles, readers who found something true in her words. Lily wrote her often. The letters came in mismatched envelopes, always adorned with stickers, puppies, rainbows, glittery unicorns, and usually opened with the phrase, "You won't believe this, but..." Then came the stories. How she'd made a volcano erupt during Science Week, how she got in trouble for hiding cookies in her backpack, how she and Jupiter the hamster were now best friends. One letter simply said, "You're my first hero. My second is Ruth Bader Ginsburg." Charlotte kept them all in a wooden box beside her bed. Some nights she'd read through them just to remember what it felt like to be seen with such simple, unflinching affection. And then one day a new envelope arrived, smaller than usual, plain, addressed in careful adult handwriting. It was from Melanie. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph. "Dear Charlotte, I wasn't sure if I should send this, but Lily insisted. She said you deserve to see it. It's from a school assignment. The teacher asked them to draw a safe place. Most kids drew their bedroom. A few drew their moms or pets. This is what Lily drew. Thank you for being that place for her, even for just a little while. With gratitude, Melanie." Charlotte stared at the photo in her hand. It was a child's drawing, messy and bright. In it, Lily stood beneath a tall tree, holding hands with a figure who wore a long dress and a crooked crown. They stood on grass filled with hearts, the sun shining overhead. Above the scene were 3 words written in big, bold letters, "With Charlotte safe." Charlotte pressed the photo to her chest and wept. She hadn't realized it had meant so much to Lily. She'd always thought she was the one who had been saved. That Lily's voice had cracked open the facade she was too afraid to look behind. But it had gone both ways. A child had reached for her, and she had reached back. And now, years later, they still held that invisible thread between them. That same week, a publishing house reached out with interest in a book proposal she'd submitted nearly a year earlier. It had been a long shot, a collection of essays about the after, about the quiet days that followed the detonation of a dream. The editor's email was simple: "This book needs to exist. We'd love to publish it." Charlotte stared at the screen, stunned. Then she called Beth. "I told you," Beth said, triumphant. "I told you this was going to happen. You kept thinking the story ended at the wedding, but this is the story." Charlotte sat down, her voice cracking. "I think I believe that now." The book came together over the course of the next several months. It wasn't just a retelling, it was a reclamation. It was titled The Day After Yes, and it was about choosing yourself in the quiet, complicated aftermath. Each chapter opened with a line from a letter, a conversation, a whisper. The final chapter, simply titled Lily, was about the girl who changed everything. Charlotte never used her full name, but when the advanced reader copies went out and early reviews began to trickle in, readers began quoting one line over and over again. She told me the truth that morning, and even though it hurt, it set me free. Because sometimes love isn't about grand gestures. It's about a child's voice, quiet but clear, saying what no one else dared to. The night before the book's official launch, Charlotte stood alone on the balcony of her apartment, the city humming gently below. She held a glass of wine in one hand and the photo Lily had drawn in the other. She didn't need to imagine the girl's voice anymore. It lived inside her. The next morning, she woke to a knock at her door. Beth stood outside, holding 2 coffees and wearing a ridiculous Book Mom t-shirt. "We're celebrating," she said. "Your book baby is out in the world." They spent the day together, lunch, laughter, Charlotte signing copies at a local indie bookstore where the owner had reserved an entire window display just for her book. As they walked past the shelves, Charlotte paused at one of the tables. A young girl, maybe 10 or 11, held a copy of the book in her hands, her lips silently forming the words as she read the first few pages. Charlotte didn't interrupt. She watched silently, remembering herself at that age, hungry for voices that told the truth, longing for proof that it was okay to speak. That night, Charlotte received a video message from Lily. It opened with her holding a copy of the book. "Hi, Charlotte," she said, smiling big and missing a front tooth. "Mom said I can read it when I'm older, but I'm going to carry it in my backpack so people know my friend is an author. and that she's brave, and that she listens. The screen shook a little as Lily adjusted the phone. "Oh, and guess what?" she added. "I told my teacher I want to write a book too. It's going to be called The Girl Who Saved a Grown-Up. It's about me." The video ended with her blowing a kiss and saying, "Bye for now, but not forever." Charlotte didn't move for a long time after that. She just sat there, holding the phone to her heart, letting the words settle in. Because that's what the truth does. It settles in, it stays, and it makes room for everything that comes after. Charlotte's book launch brought with it more than just glowing reviews and modest acclaim. It brought connection. Letters began arriving from women who had never dared speak the truth about the lives they had almost lived. One woman from Connecticut wrote to say she'd canceled a wedding after reading Charlotte's story, finally admitting to herself that love shouldn't feel like walking on glass. Another woman, a retired teacher, thanked Charlotte for giving voice to something she'd buried for 30 years, a broken engagement to a man everyone said was perfect, even when he'd erased her with every word he spoke. Charlotte read each letter carefully, replying in longhand when she could. There was something sacred in the way people trusted her now, not as a guru or a public figure, but as someone who had stepped into the fire and come out scorched but whole. In early March, she was asked to speak at a women's conference held in a city 2 hours away. The invitation came from the director of a local support group that helped women recover from controlling relationships. The theme was choosing yourself. Charlotte stood on a stage in a borrowed navy dress, the lights soft and warm, a crowd of over 200 women seated before her. "I thought the hardest moment of my life was when I walked away from my wedding," she began, her voice steady. "But it wasn't. The hardest moment came after, when the world went quiet and I had to decide what my voice sounded like without his in my ear." There were tears in the audience, and nods, and the stillness that comes when truth is no longer a secret. "I didn't lose everything that day," she continued. "I gained everything that matters, and I did it because a little girl whispered what no one else would say." When the session ended, dozens of women lined up just to hug her. Some had no words. They just held her, shaking. Others whispered, "You saved me," or "Now I know I'm not alone." Charlotte received it all with a grace she hadn't known she possessed. Later that night, in her hotel room, she stared at her reflection in the mirror. No makeup, hair loose, eyes tired, but honest. "Do you see her?" she whispered to herself. "She's still here, and she's enough." The next morning, she woke to a message from Melanie. "Lily wants to know if she can interview you for her school podcast." Charlotte laughed out loud. Of course she could. That weekend, Charlotte sat in front of her laptop as Lily appeared on screen, wearing oversized headphones and a blazer that hung down past her elbows. "Welcome to Lily Tells It Like It Is," she began, eyes gleaming. "Today, I'm talking to my favorite writer who once didn't get married and is now super famous for being awesome." Charlotte tried not to laugh. "Thanks for having me." Lily dove right in. "So, tell the people, was it scary to walk away from a big fancy wedding?" "Yes," Charlotte said honestly. "It was one of the scariest things I've ever done." "Why did you do it?" "Because someone told me the truth, and I realized I'd rather have no wedding at all than one built on a lie." Lily gave a dramatic gasp. "That's a good line. I'm writing that down." The rest of the interview was equal parts adorable and profound. Lily asked real questions about fear, about courage, about how to know when someone really loves you, and Charlotte answered each one with as much honesty as her heart could offer. When it ended, Lily waved at the camera. "Okay, bye. And remember, listen to your gut, even if it's a small gut." Charlotte closed her laptop and wiped her eyes. 2 weeks later, the podcast went viral. Teachers shared it. Parents reposted it. A local news station even picked it up with the headline, "10-Year-Old Girl Interviews Author Who Walked Away from the Wrong I Do and Inspires a Movement." Charlotte's inbox flooded again. But this time they weren't just letters of gratitude. They were invitations, schools, shelters, book clubs, even a university sociology class that wanted to analyze the day after yes as a case study on personal agency. She said yes to as many as she could, not because she loved the spotlight, but because every new audience meant another chance to plant the seed that had been given to her. Then, on a warm April evening, Charlotte was invited to speak at an awards gala honoring voices in literature and social justice. She didn't expect to win anything. She barely believed she belonged in the room. But as the final award of the night was announced, the presenter said her name. She froze at the table, stunned, until Beth elbowed her hard enough to make her move. She walked to the stage, hands shaking. "This award," the presenter said, "goes to a woman who reminded the world that the smallest truths, when spoken bravely, can change everything." Charlotte took the plaque with quiet wonder. She faced the audience and spoke not from a script, but from her heart. "This doesn't belong to me alone," she said. "It belongs to a girl who once whispered what no one else dared say, and to every person who has chosen to tell the truth, even when it costs everything. This is for the ones who speak." That night, after the applause had faded and the photographs had been taken, Charlotte walked out into the spring air with Beth. "You know," Beth said, "if you ever decide to get married again, I hope the man understands he's stepping into one hell of a story." Charlotte smiled. "If I do, it won't be because I need him." "No?" "No," she said. "It'll be because he listens." And under the city lights, arm in arm with her sister, Charlotte realized something else. She had always been the main character of her life. It had just taken a child's voice to help her remember. "Let me know when you're ready for the final section. We are now approaching the 12,000-word completion point." It was early summer when Charlotte finally made the trip. Not a business trip, not a speaking engagement, just something she had been quietly planning for months. She took the train north along the coastline, passing cliffs and wildflower fields, watching the towns blur together as the rhythm of the rails calmed her mind. She carried only a small overnight bag, a notebook and an envelope. She hadn't told anyone except Beth, not because she wanted it to be secret, but because some journeys needed to be made alone. When she arrived in the small seaside town, the air smelled like salt and pine. The bed and breakfast was modest but warm, the kind of place with mismatched quilts and handwritten notes from the owners welcoming her by name. She dropped her bag in the room and walked straight to the address written on a slip of paper in her pocket. It was a small school tucked between a chapel and a diner. Not special by outward appearance, but for Charlotte, it had become almost mythic. This was the school where Lily had drawn the picture, where she'd read from Charlotte's book during a school project and said, "Sometimes grown-ups don't know what's best, and that's why we have to help them." Charlotte stepped into the front office and introduced herself. The receptionist smiled wide. "Lily's been talking about this for weeks." Charlotte laughed softly. "That sounds like her. She's in the library. Go ahead." Charlotte walked the halls slowly, her fingers brushing the faded mural painted along the corridor walls. Flying books, talking animals, children holding maps and telescopes. She reached the library and stepped inside. Lily was there, sitting cross-legged on a beanbag, reading aloud to a small group of younger students. Her voice was animated, full of expression, her hands acting out each sentence. Charlotte didn't speak. She just watched. When the story ended, the kids clapped and dispersed. Lily turned, and her face lit up like a firework. "Charlotte!" She ran into her arms and squeezed hard. "You really came." "I said I would." Lily pulled her by the hand to the reading corner. "I have something for you. I made it myself, with construction paper and everything." Charlotte waited as Lily dug into her backpack and pulled out a carefully stapled book. The cover had a drawing of 2 stick figures under a tree. "It's called The Girl Who Saved Her Grown-Up," Lily said. "Want to read it together?" Charlotte nodded, and they sat down side by side. The story was simple but powerful. A little girl sees something nobody else does, she tells the truth. The grown-up listens. And because of that, everything changes. There's sadness, but also joy. There's a new home, a new book, a new beginning. And at the end, the girl and the grown-up fly off together in a hot air balloon, smiling at the stars. Charlotte turned the final page and blinked away tears. "Lily," she whispered, "it's beautiful." Lily beamed. "It's all true, except the balloon part. That was for fun." Charlotte laughed. "I figured." Then she reached into her bag and pulled out her envelope. "I brought you something, too, for later, when you're older." Lily took it with reverence. "Is it a secret?" "It's a letter, a very long one, about everything I never want you to forget." Lily nodded, holding it to her chest. "I'll keep it forever." That afternoon, Melanie met them outside the school. She hugged Charlotte without hesitation. "She's never stopped talking about you," Melanie said. "Not once." Charlotte smiled. "She hasn't changed. She's braver now, and kinder." "That's not me, that's who she is." Melanie paused. "We're moving next year. New city. I got a new job. I just wanted you to know, in case we lose touch." Charlotte nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me." Melanie hesitated. "I also wanted to say something else." Charlotte waited. "You changed me, too. Not overnight, but slowly. Because of you, I stopped excusing the things I knew were wrong. I stopped letting fear run everything." "I'm glad," Charlotte said softly. "You were the grown-up Lily needed," Melanie said. "And somehow, the one I needed too." They hugged again, and then Melanie took Lily's hand and led her down the sidewalk. Lily turned around one last time and waved so hard it made her whole body rock back and forth. Charlotte waved back until she couldn't see her anymore. Back in her room at the bed and breakfast, Charlotte took out her notebook. She wrote for hours, not to meet a deadline, but just to remember every detail of the day, every word Lily said, every emotion that bloomed inside her like light through stained glass. Later, as the sky dimmed and the ocean grew louder outside the window, she stepped onto the porch and stared out at the horizon. She had built a life again, word by word, choice by choice. She had been the runaway bride, the whispered about author, the woman who once didn't speak up. But now? Now she was the one who listened. And maybe, just maybe, one day, someone else would whisper their truth, and she'd be there, steady and still, to hear it. Because she knew now, without a doubt, sometimes the voice that saves you isn't loud. Sometimes it's the whisper you almost missed. And when you finally listen, that's when everything begins.